Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Welcome back, everyone. We have a great episode today, and I'm glad you can join us. My guest today is Rachita Sundar. Rachita is the CFO of Qualtrics, a cloud-based experience management platform. Prior to joining Qualtrics, she served in leadership positions at HubSpot and Microsoft. Rachita, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thank you for having me here, Jack. It's such a privilege to be able to be a part of the Rockstar CFO podcast. I've listened to many of my peers before this podcast, and this is something I really enjoy. So I appreciate you having me here.
Oh, you're the person who listens. We knew we had a listener. We weren't sure who it is. Glad we identified her. No, I was thrilled to have the opportunity because we've known each other since towards the tail end of your tenure at HubSpot. And, so having you as a guest is really exciting. And I'm not as familiar with Qualtrics. I know it's a great company, hot. Maybe you can share a little bit for our listeners about the story there, because it's a great one.
Yeah, Qualtrics is an experience management company, and we want to make the human experience the best it can be. And that's what we focus on as a company. So we have 3 products. One is on customer experience, one is on employee experience, as well as a strategy and research product that helps us tie all of these together at the end of the day to help companies improve experiences for their customers, improve retention for themselves, and improve their employee experience as a company.
Okay, great. Well, a terrific mission, and look forward to returning that. But first, I want to ask a little about you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Delhi, India. That's where I did my schooling. I did my graduation in India as well before I moved to the United States, did my post-graduation here, and then my career has been here.
Yeah, because in undergrad, you studied an engineering, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
So it might have been tough when you picked that at 18 to think that you would be working for, some hot tech companies in a financial leadership type of capacity. But do you think that background has served you well as a CFO?
I do believe it has served me really well. If you followed my career, Jack, you'll know that I didn't set out to be a CFO or think that I would actually work in finance in my career. My career has been driven a lot around experiences I wanted to gain and what I found joy in doing. And I just kind of followed my heart in that space. Being an engineer has definitely helped me, because I think the transferable skills of logical thinking, always taking the big picture, breaking down a problem in a way that's solvable is something that I've used in my finance career. And then, of course, I had to learn the financial concepts to complement that. But that transferable skill of how an engineer thinks about and solves problems is something that has really helped me in my career.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've had a number of former engineers as guests on the show, and they're CFOs, and, they're doing really well. And I sort of think about it like the main job of a CFO at this point is really solving problems, right? And there's no one better doing that. And, even if you don't have the time or the inclination to learn some of the accounting skills, that's delegable. That can be delegated. I'm not sure if delegable is an actual English language word. But anyway, that's something you can delegate, but you can't delegate problem-solving skills. If you're not good at that, you're really going to struggle as a CFO in the modern world. A little different. I'm a traditional CPA CFO, and, that's fine. A lot of people do get that today, but, the role is so different that it can't be just that type of background anymore.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've read an article that you published in Fortune around different types of CFOs, and now I really feel like more and more companies want transformational, strategic, operational CFOs versus, accounting based, which you need. You need a really strong accounting partner to a CFO to run the company well, but more and more companies are now moving towards those types of CFOs just because of what's happening in the market.
That makes sense. And my bosses over at Forbes heard you call it fortune. So
Oh, sorry.
it's not a big deal. I confuse the two of them myself all the time until I worked for one of them. So, but yeah, it's that was the CFO archetype article, I assume. Yeah,
Yes.
I had to actually, funny story, I had to change that because I had the 8 archetypes. And then I posted on LinkedIn and said, someone read, what about the digital CFO?
Yeah, I saw that.
I was on this. How could I have forgotten that one? So
And when I read it, I was like mapping. I'm like, okay, which one of the boxes do I check? And how much is it a digital versus a strategic versus operational? Because at the end of the day, I don't think it's being a CFO, one archetype of CFO is going to be enough in this market. You have to be kind of a bit of all, but then you have to figure out like what is the leading one and what are the ones that supplement.
yeah, I wish you were my editor because more than a few people thought that I was suggesting that you were one and that was it type of stuff. And it really wasn't what I was going for. And I just wasn't very clear on it with hindsight. So if anyone goes back to listen to it, it just sort of you're a combination of the archetypes, not one in particular mostly. So
Exactly.
cool. But that's great. So I'd love to talk about your career journey because it's been quite interesting. And you work for this small company, I guess it's near Seattle in Redmond called Microsoft. I'm not sure exactly what they do. It sounds like it might be software from the name or something like that. But tell me how you ended up at Microsoft.
Yeah, it's a funny story. As I did my MBA, as you know, my background is in engineering. This was 2008. And I've always dreamed of, as an engineer, the company you dream of working for was Microsoft at that time, right? And I always wanted to be a part of Microsoft. And I was lucky enough to get an internship there, and which converted into a full-time opportunity, which then converted into 14 years of a very rewarding career with that company. So that's why I ended up there through business school. I reached out to alumni that were there, got an interview, and it was all I was targeting that company as I got out of business school.
So yeah, it's probably a good company to target. And I'm going to go back. I often ask people what their first job was. And I mean, maybe when they were a teenager or in college. And so what was the first job you ever did? Because sometimes this is the most fun part of the interview. So,
In college, I used to tutor young kids
okay.
to make extra money on the side. I went to college in Bangalore, which is not where my parents are based. And the last 2 years, I was in a hostel type of an environment. And extra money was always helpful at that age to spend it. So I used to tutor young kids to earn that extra money. That was my first job. I worked through business school, so I have had multiple different types of jobs since then.
Yeah, that's a very rewarding first job. And yeah, it's remarkable. Well, high performing people, that was probably beginning to manifest itself in our late teens and early 20 type of years. So, but so
Totally.
that's great. So, but returning to Microsoft, and then, HubSpot too, we'll get to, but Microsoft in particular, some of the smartest people in the world probably work at Microsoft, I would think. And they're known as world-class finance. So, what was that like working with some smart people? What are some lessons that you learned along the way that prepared you for, your current role as with a high-flying tech company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as I've gotten out of Microsoft, I've hired from multiple different companies. And that's when I really had the appreciation of how some of these companies like Microsoft, P&G, GE, Unilever, like those are the ones that I can call out today, have really built a great infrastructure of building really good finance talent. I didn't understand that while I was at Microsoft, but now that I've come out and hired from multiple different places, it just like reinforces that. The things I would say is, first of all, of course, you work with the most smart people. The growth mindset culture is something that we cannot underestimate within Microsoft. It was instilled in us as we grew our career on constantly learning, constantly expanding your scope, finding something new every 2 years, getting uncomfortable every 2 years. And the fact that, Amy has a very strategic mindset to how she thinks about finance and how we partner with different parts of the business. Those are things that are so different, in addition to the amount Microsoft invests in building talents, in training, in leadership programs. Those are things that I think are differentiating when you think about talent that comes out of some of these companies versus companies that really don't have the infrastructure or the money to do that, or are scaling and can't afford to do it at the same level that companies like Microsoft can.
Yeah, it must have been quite an experience. And, a lot of people, there's, Microsoft lifers. And, you probably could have been, you were there a
Yeah.
little over a decade, as I recall. And, but then you made the leap to what is a great source of pride in the Boston, Massachusetts area, HubSpot, one of the real, one of the few billion-dollar companies within my adult life, I'll say. So what was that decision like, other than the hot company, but how'd you end up there? And, what was that like leaving the biggest of the big?
It was a really, really hard decision. I will say that. I had a fantastic 14 and a half career. I'll go back to what I said in the previous answer. The thing that Microsoft instilled in most people is the growth mindset, learning culture, new experiences, right? And at the end of that 14 and a half years, what I'd realized is I had done all the roles within Microsoft that were interesting to me, right? Like I had supported engineering, I'd supported sales, I'd done OpEx, I'd scaled a business like Azure, Office 365. So everything that I thought was exciting within the company, I had done that. And that's when I was like, oh, is it time for me to look outside? And that's when HubSpot actually reached out and that opportunity came up. So leaving was so hard, Jack, because you've built a 14 and a half year, very successful career with great sponsors, mentors. You know that you'll be successful in the company. I had internal offers for the next level, even at Microsoft when I left. And then you were going to this new company. You didn't know anybody. SaaS world was new. It was less than $1 billion, right? In revenue when I joined HubSpot. And you had to start from scratch. You had to build relationships. You were expanding your portfolio. You had to lead a remote team, which I had never done till then because Microsoft was in person. And this was like, I moved in the middle of pandemic. You had to build new relationships. So it was very unsettling, honestly. And it was a very big decision for me to make that leap. But I think it was such a great learning opportunities, and that gave me the confidence to then make the leap to Qualtrics when I did. So I will say when people make those decisions, it remains uncomfortable for the first year, but you only grow through uncomfortable experiences.
That makes sense. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but I interviewed for the HubSpot CFO job.
You did.
Yeah. Why? They made the right choice with Kate.
Kate is fantastic. They definitely did make the right choice. She's a fantastic CFO.
Yeah, she and I were at Sloan together. She was either a year ahead of me or a year behind me, I forget. But, and I don't think I'm dumb or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, but she just has it, I mean, you can just tell when certain people, wow, this person is really smart, competent and whatnot. So she was the better choice. I might have bankrupted the company, but Brian liked me and we got along well. So he gave me the courtesy of an interview for the role. So, one thing, you've worked for some great people and had some great mentors along the way. And you and I recently worked on a mentorship panel together, which was really well received by our members. But I'm assuming within your career, you're probably pretty coveted as a mentor, be it formally or informally. And what's your own philosophy on mentoring the next generation?
I believe a lot in mentoring the next generation. I've mentored throughout my career. It's very interesting, Jack. Like one of the observations I've had throughout mentoring is a lot of the times the people I mentor, and even now the people I mentor, are women who are trying to grow their careers, right? Whereas I have had both female and male mentors in my life. So it's a very interesting observation. I go seek out people I can mentor that are of diverse gender, ethnicity, and things like that, because we can all learn from each other's experiences. But that's something that I value a lot and a lot of time for. The other thing I'll point out is one of the things I'm very conscious of is women are often over-mentored, under-sponsored, right? So I do spend a lot of time mentoring people, but at the same time, I also give a lot of thought on who are the people I want to sponsor and help grow their career. Because I've had both mentors and sponsors, and my career wouldn't be where it is today if I didn't have a few sponsors that really believed in me and helped me through my career.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And yeah, it is interesting because in our profession, women have not yet quite achieved statistical parity, but it's pretty close. And, when you look 10 years out, it'll probably be CFOs will probably be roughly 50-50. In fact, I know you mentioned on social media, you saw some of the posts, but yeah, it was like 48% of the CFOs at our conference last week were female. And, that's not some fluky aberration. That's been trending in that direction for a while. So it's great that you're in a position to mentor that generation, but more importantly, that you can, be a sponsor and an ally as well. Because mentoring's great. It has its limitations. It's like, okay, I can teach you this. Now let me work on your behalf within the company and make sure that someone besides me knows how brilliant you are. So,
Absolutely. And that is so important.
yeah. So, no, that's great. So let's chat Qualtrics and tell us a little about, you mentioned, making the leap. HubSpot gave you the confidence to later make the leap to Qualtrics, but how'd that one come about? I don't need to understand why you made it because, it's pretty obvious. It's a great organization, but, how'd the opportunity come about and what sort of pushed you over the edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Qualtrics was looking for a CFO, and they had interviewed a couple of my sponsors at Microsoft for that role, and one of them had suggested my name for this role. So that's how they reached out to me. So again, importance of, building great relationships, maintaining great relationships, and keeping that. So that's how it came to me. I'll go back to the principles that I've used to grow my career, learning and new experiences. And this actually ticked the box for me for three things. One is I always want to be working in a company in a growing market that's a category creator. HubSpot is that, right? Same with Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a category creator and leader in experience management. So I was like, okay, that checks the box, and you want to work for a company that's a leader and a creator. The second thing from a learning as well as experience perspective is moving from public to a private equity company, which is a pretty stark shift, right? And which is pretty different in how you can be a CFO for a public company versus a private equity. So that was also a really, really great opportunity for me. And then the third thing that I always look for is people. Like, how's my experience through the interview loop? What does the team look like? What are the values? And both HubSpot and Qualtrics, I feel like, checked the boxes for me before I made the move. So those three criteria checked the box for me. And then I thought it would be a great opportunity to go do that, especially in these years where every company is fighting for relevance and is trying to make the big shift into this AI world.
Yeah, indeed. So one thing I, just to prepare for this, I visited the website and it seems like it has a wonderful culture. And one thing I saw on the website, it described that it was pretty cool. I'd never seen it put this way, but, sort of I don't know if they're your values, but they were transparent,
Yeah.
being all in, customer obsessed, scrappy, which I found to be kind of the most interesting one, and then one team. And from what I know about you, that seems almost culturally like a really good fit, right? Almost as if you could have designed it. I realize it probably predates you, but what is the company, do they live true to that? And how does that affect you on a day-to-day?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. It is a lot of the values that I relate to. So that was one of the pieces. As you think about how does it relate day to day, I do see those values lived day to day. The question that we all are asking ourselves, and I ask myself, is this is a great set of values that has gotten us here, and how do we need to evolve the culture to get us to the next level, right? Like, for example, this is true for a lot of scaling SaaS companies, and it is true for Qualtrics, where Scrappy has gotten us here through the area of, or the time of hypergrowth in the market. Now, how do we think about moving that Scrappy to scalable And how do you think about evolving and building on top of that to get to a scalable, large company is how I think about it. But the values is something I see lived every day within Qualtrics. And, that hasn't disappointed me. I'm here almost 10 months now, 10, 11 months. So that hasn't disappointed me. And we constantly think about how do we evolve the culture to set us up better for the future.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. Right now, there's talent wars just seem like they will never stop, right? And, when people who want to attract talent, particularly, young talent is Gen Z, and I'm sure you've worked with a bunch of them, but they're very impressive. And, but they do have kind of a different way of doing things than, say my generation did. But, so what's your philosophy on recruiting talent? Because it's hard. People really aren't entering the profession like they used to. It's just there's a shortage of accountants, generally CPAs in particular, for when you need people with that technical expertise. So do you have any tools, tricks you can share with our audience? You might not want to because they might steal them and compete for you with talent.
Yeah, one of the things I also did, back to your question on mentorship, is when we started thinking about, when I started leading a team with Gen Zs in it, I had a reverse mentor because I was like, I really need to understand how they work, how they think, because it's very different from when I started my career, when you started your career, probably, Jack. From a talent acquisition perspective, it's my strategy has always been to test for three things when you hire anybody. One is curiosity. Do they have curiosity? Second is bias for action. And then the third and the last thing is growth mindset, right? What I've found, Jack, is most of the skill sets that we use in finance, other than, very, very niche skill sets like internal audit and accounting, where you have to test for the skill set. That's very important. Like, you have to have the skills to do the job. But if you have 80% of the skills, we can teach you the other 20% of the skills. And that's very coachable and very teachable. But the most important thing that's very hard to coach and teach is curiosity, bias for action, and collaboration. And if you have those three things, we can top up teaching the skills that you don't have for you to be a very productive member of the team. So I always test for those things. I also believe, like, I've been really lucky to have people that have worked for me in the past that will always come back and work for me as I move in these companies. I also believe that as we move companies, there should be a really good mix of new talent that you bring in and tenured talent within the company. In your leadership team, for you to be able to balance understanding and rewarding the history the company has had, that these tenured people bring with them, and the knowledge that they bring with them, with new ways of doing things that new people bring in. And when you bring in these new people, they would know what good looks like at scale. So that combination of retaining tenured talent while bringing in some new talent into my leadership team has been kind of a strategy I've used at all these companies to be able to scale teams really well.
No, that's fantastic. I love what you said about intellectual curiosity, because for me, I don't care what the person's credentials are. If they're not intellectually curious and want to challenge themselves and learn new stuff, every day pretty much, that's not someone that I want to work with. And I don't have all the answers and probably never will. So I like people intellectually curious who are going to challenge my assumptions on things.
Right.
You as a CFO, me as a president, albeit with a very small company, there are people that just aren't going to challenge you just because of the title, not because of your personality. I mean, I assume that you're probably pretty approachable with your team,
Yes.
but it might be, oh, she's the CFO. She doesn't want to hear from me. So.
Yeah, and that's a very important piece too. As you hire these people, one of the things we continue to talk about and think about, and we actually have I do these roundtables to do this with everybody on the team, is how do you build psychological safety within the team? Because to your point, as a CFO, you're only as good as the team underneath you. And same for every layer you have within the organization. So how do you hire people that are smarter than you, that are curious, subject matter experts? And how do you build a culture of psychological safety so that together you get to the right answer versus them looking to you for the right answer?
Oh, that's great. So I want to change it a little bit. I'm fond of saying T&T, talent and technology. So, if we move to technology and, Moore's laws, I think is probably outdated in the current world, but it certainly had its run. I mean, just technology, it's virtually, seems like it's impossible to keep pace with things.
Keep up, yeah.
But by the way, a good justification for a Gen Z mentor, by the way. So, but, what's your philosophy, and not so much your philosophy, but how are you using technology, whether it be generative AI or other advanced technologies, not only in finance and accounting, but to fundamentally give your organization a competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We're still experimenting on that, is the honest answer with that, right? With finance use cases. There are a few use cases that have really, had an impact, and we're trying to see how we scale that up. And then there are use cases where our underlying infrastructure doesn't allow us to make progress yet. And I'll give you examples of both. And that's kind of something we're working on. So, use cases that have actually helped us be more efficient as a finance organization is three. We implemented a use case in AP for duplicate invoice generation, and we caught over $400,000 just in the last month of duplicate invoices, right? And that's something that would have had to go through manual processes, or people would have caught some, not caught some. And that's been one that's been really successful, and that's gotten us to be a way more efficient. The second one we are using is Flowcast AI and Workiva AI together, in both how we close our books from an accounting perspective, but also for our prep for our lender call, which is the PE equivalent of earnings call, right? So those are other two that have kind of helped us. The third thing that we're working as an organization on is building an AI bot. So as a finance organization that also, leads sales crediting and, quota crediting organization, we get tons of questions around quota crediting and things like that. So working on building a bot that would be able to field 80% of those questions so that my crediting team is actually working on more value-added work and setting the right policies versus spending a ton of time on these. So those are kind of the four that have landed and have had an impact for us as an organization. The other couple that we have tried to land but are still working through our systems and tools is on the FP&A side around forecasting and workforce planning. And that is very dependent on how your workforce planning tool and HRIS system is integrated with your FP&A tools, right? And we're still working through the foundations of that. And then in treasury management system between AP, our banks, and how we manage our daily cash. So that's another one we're experimenting with. Haven't really had a ton of success with that yet.
Oh, you'll get there. I have absolutely no doubt. It's a fun time to be a CFO, I would think.
Exactly.
A little scary to keep up. I have a friend, and I won't mention his name. There's a chance you might know, but he's actually written what he thinks is the definitive book on generative AI for CFOs, but he can't get it published because every time he goes through the process of, getting approval on the publication and then it being actually released, it's no longer valid.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I was like, why haven't I read that book?
He's sort of given up the idea that he'll ever actually be able to publish the book. It's just the pace of change is too rapid. So, but one thing I like, and you've perhaps heard me ask this question before on the podcast, but I love when non-CPA CFOs are the guests because they just evaluate things differently. And I'm curious, as you weren't trained in that way, but what are some of the most meaningful KPIs you use to measure business performance and know that your company's doing well or maybe, not so well?
That is a great, great question. And I'll go back to your archetypes and talk about operational CFOs. I am a big proponent of tying operational metrics to financial metrics to outcome metrics. So I think about metrics in three buckets. One is operational metrics, which are far more leading indicators than anything else, right? And for example, as I think about sales execution, I'll think about demand capacity execution, right? Like, are you generating the right amount of demand? Is the quality of demand good? Do you have the right selling capacity? Blah, blah, blah. Are you executing right in terms of close rates? And those are like primary leading indicators. In SaaS business, financial leading indicators is net new ARR, right? What is the total ACV you're driving? What does your downgrade trend look like? What does your churn trend look like? Because that is what will tell you what your revenue is going to be next year. What does your upgrade trend look like? What does customer behavior look like? That's what that is. And of course, EBITDA is a very important one that we track. We also track free cash flow, like cash position and all those things. Those are some of the leading indicators in finance. Billings. And then you have lagging indicators, which is what the industry generally looks at, which is revenue. And revenue is so far lagging that that's something you think about as you report. But my time is largely spent on the operational and financial leading indicator metrics because that's what determines your revenue outcome.
That makes a whole lot of sense. So I want to chat a little about your relationships at work. And this is your first CFO job. And in prior jobs, you've worked with some, great leaders, but they were financial leaders. Kate's one of the best CFOs in the game. And, your team at Microsoft speaks for itself.
Amy's the best.
Yeah. Oh, did you actually directly report to her?
I didn't. I was one removed from her.
Okay. But you you said it the best for people who aren't aware with Amy Hood. Perhaps Rachita was speaking metaphorically, but she's certainly one of the half a dozen best CFOs in the country, I have to think. I mean, just phenomenal. But, now you're reporting to the CEO for the first time, and it's just any CFO. Zig Serafin, if I'm pronouncing it properly. I don't want to say legendary, but hell of a track record on that one. Very well known, very well respected. How'd you come as a first-time CFO develop a relationship with someone like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I will say that in my prior roles, so like at HubSpot, as the FP&A lead, I had to have a great relationship with Yamini too, who's a fantastic CEO as well. So it's not that you don't have to build those relationships if you're one removed, but it is a different lens, honestly, Jack. And, the way Zig and I work is you have to think about, I think of CFO, CEO, and CHRO as three legs of a stool, right? And those three legs need to work very closely together and have a very trusted relationship for us to be able to move the company in the right direction. And that's how I kind of think about it. It is interesting to be honest, like when you are directly working for a CEO and you're making decisions together, the perspectives are very different, right? Like when you work for a CFO, the perspective is always going to be finance-led first perspective, and it's easier. Whereas when you work for a CEO, they're wearing multiple hats, and the perspective will not always be finance-led perspective. Same with the CHRO, they're wearing a different hat than what you are wearing, which is why it's important to have a very tight relationship where you're able to push back, have all of the perspectives on the table, and be able to advise and make decisions together. At the end of the day, a lot of the decisions are a CEO decision, but at the same time, you'd be doing the company a disservice if the three of you don't have a relationship where you can debate a lot of these decisions.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's if the CEO just says there's not going to be a debate, this is my vision, I expect you to execute it. Well, if you're fortunate enough to work with a CEO who's always right, whose instincts are always spot on and perfect, that's great. But that doesn't really happen very often in real life. So It's great that you sort of have that partnership. And I love that you brought HR into it as well, because it is, it's sort of going through the evolution that CFOs have gone through in the last 10 or 12 years, where people thought of it as compliance and whatnot versus the strategic asset that it is. It's lagging finance. I don't know that CPOs or CTOs or whatever they might be quite have the level of respect that CFOs have earned in the last decade, but it's beginning to happen for sure. I can see a lot of the same symptoms or signs. So
yeah, absolutely. Because they help lead the workforce, right? And your biggest assets are your customers and your people. That's it.
Yeah. Without people, you don't have much of a company. So even in a world in generative AI, it's still the people. So
exactly.
So I want to chat. So Qualtrics has gone through, a really interesting evolution. It was, a survey company at one point, and now it's really a full-fledged experience management platform. And so from a CFO's perspective, a transformation like that, what does it look like financially? Because you had kind of a good thing when you were, in the original model to begin with, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I don't think it's like a transformation done type of a story, right, Jack? With any company, you're constantly transforming. And with what's happening with AI, you're doing this again. I'll go back to this is one of the things I learned at Microsoft. If you actually go back and look up top 10 market cap companies over the last 5 decades, there are very few that have consistently been in the top 5 market cap companies, and Microsoft has been one of them. And if you go back and say, why is it? It's because they have constantly transformed themselves to a transforming market, right? Maybe like 5 decades ago, they were there with Shell and all these oil companies. Then they were there with Apple and a bunch of companies, and then Google. And like now it's AI companies. So if you look at that, a lot has changed around then, but they have consistently been there. So I think one of the lessons I took is a company is always transforming. And as a CFO, what it means for you and what's most important for you to understand is capital allocation. That makes or breaks the transformation. Of course, the CHRO is thinking about different things on cultural transformation. How do you transform that in the right way? So how do you think about capital allocation frameworks that help you invest in the places that are in the future? And how do you build a muscle of divestment within the company? That's something actually like we've struggled with at both companies I worked at, HubSpot as well as Qualtrics, because a lot of these SaaS companies went through hyper growth and were able to transform in a way where it was a cash-rich environment. And it's after 2022 is really when these companies have seen a very constrained environment to be able to drive growth. And you have to think about divestment constantly as you think about investments, and have frameworks like LTV to CAC, divest in your engineering infrastructure. Like how much are you putting on forward-looking innovation versus KTLO versus keeping the infrastructure, LTV to CAC on a go-to-market side, as well as overall company investment divestment framework. So I think CFOs need to constantly evolve and think about frameworks on capital allocation to be able to drive this successfully.
That's great. So, and one thing, Qualtrics, the value proposition is data, I think. And,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, you'd certainly know better than I would. But, so obviously it's sort of incumbent upon the finance team to use data creatively too, right? So be a little bit hypocritical if you weren't on the cutting edge. But so how does finance in your organization use data to basically make better, smarter decisions?
Yeah, it's a great, great question. I think of finance in a, and this is what I've landed with my team and internally in a pyramid kind of structure. The base of the pyramid, the foundation of finance is getting our execution and jobs right, like closing the book on times, no material variances, right? Being able to pass audits, taxes, like all of that, the execution pieces of it, AP, AR, managing all of those things right. That's like to just get a seat at the table, right? This means that you're doing your job. The second part of the pillar that I talk about is stakeholder management. As a CFO and finance organization, you have internal stakeholders, which is your business partners, and then you have external stakeholders, which are your analysts, your lenders, like all these people. Your CEO is a stakeholder, your team is a stakeholder. So how do you map out the stakeholders and how do you think about a strategy of managing them? The last part of the pillar and the most value-added part of the pillar is strategic insights. And that's where the data piece and how you think about strategic insights comes into play. I truly think about the FP&A function as well as our IR treasury function has to be at the leading edge of how do you take business performance, operational metrics, forward-looking metrics, how do you stitch that data together, and how do you drive actionable insights in collaboration with the business to change the business? And that's what we've been working on here in building a muscle within Qualtrics, Jack, honestly, like stitching a lot of these insights together, teaching that skill to our finance organization on you're not a reporting organization. You're actually an insights and action organization. How do you build insights that you can land with the business, and how do you work with them to remediate the problem that you've just found?
Okay, that's wonderful. And yeah, I mean, the tagline to this podcast is CFOs no longer record history, they make history.
That's right.
What you just described, right? I mean, there's And I do tell controllers this, particularly if they're coming up, if they're coming through the traditional controllership track and want to be a CFO, I tell them, look, there's a lot of people with your skill set. It's sort of the vision and the ability to not just state facts, but tell the story behind the facts. What do they mean? And, make it, make the music sing, so to speak. So that's great. So I want to change gears a little bit, because before we went on, we talked a little about, you do something which I think is very wonderful and special from a community service perspective with Sophie's Way. And I'd love to ask, a little bit about how you got involved, and maybe tell the listeners a little bit about that organization, because it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question. Thank you very much. That's something women's causes has been something that's been close to my heart forever. Just in terms of, how do we uplift other women within the organization or within the community or anywhere that you are? Growing up in Delhi and India, there wasn't much expected of women, right? We were taught to be seen, not heard, and there wasn't a ton expected. I was very lucky to grow up in a family where they believed in educating women. They believed in making sure that women are independent in ourselves. In fact, my mom was the first one in my dad's family to ever work. So it was something that was very close to my heart and that I've continued to work on. So I've been associated with women's initiatives for a pretty long time. I used to teach yoga at a point at which at that time, used to volunteer and teach. Right now, between my job and my two kids, I wish I had more time to volunteer with them. But the way I support them is monetarily, right? Like I always think about how can I support organizations like this, either with time, monetarily, or in terms of just mentoring and bringing women up. So Sophie's Way is a women's shelter that's in Seattle. And they honestly help women that are transitioning from bad circumstances to get back on their feet. It's a wonderful organization, and that's the organization right now that we monetarily support as a couple.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. So great. So which leads me to a question. You have a lot going on, running this great company, doing this volunteer work, and, work-life balance is always challenging. So do you have any secrets or advice that you can give to people to, if not have it all, at least have most of it?
Oh, I wish. If somebody else had advice or a magic pill for this, I would love to hear that. It's a constant balance every day that you have to strike, right? As a mom, as somebody that's a part of the community, as well as somebody that works in an organization or leads an organization. One of the things I've kind of started to do over the last 4 to 5 years, Jack, honestly, is, there are 5 things that in the grand scheme of life are important to me. First is the work I do, my children, right, and family. Third is the community that we're in and support. Fourth is health. And fifth is overall, how I think about learning and what am I learning and how am I growing. So those are the 5 things. One of the things I've started to do is every year in January, I'll sit down and say, I can probably do 2 of these things very well. 2, I can dabble and do a little bit and find a way. And 1, I just have to not do, right? And for now, as my kids get into high school and as they were in middle school, and so our kids were always on that list. And they're going to be till they graduate high school. So that's a constant. Then you think about, okay, is it work? Are you going to spend more time on, giving back to the community? Is it friends? And then you prioritize and you say, what are you going to spend most of your time on in a week? And then what is it that falls and how do you support differently? That's why earlier when I said, I used to spend time at Sophie's Way. Now I support them monetarily because right now I can't spend as much time as I used to in the past. I do this prioritization every year. And then I try to align the time I spend with the things I said are top 2 that I want to do extremely well, the next 2 that I want to spend some time on, and invariably something falls off the grid.
Yeah.
Like for years where I didn't work out for 2 years, unfortunately, because there just wasn't time, right?
Yeah. I'm someone who supposedly loves to work out, and I'll go months at a time without doing it. And, I regret it, but just sometimes you've got to do those things. So I ask
Exactly.
how old your children are?
They're 14. I have 14-year-old twins. They just They're freshmen in high school this year. So it's a big year for us.
Yeah. And then in 4 years, you've got another really big year.
Exactly.
So that's fantastic. So I want to ask, I like to get the perspective. The CFO has changed in ways, I think it's fair to say, not a lot of people envisioned it, but it's continuing to grow. So I'm curious, where do you see financial leadership going over the next several years?
Yeah, I think the need is even now. I really feel like the CEO is almost like needs to almost wear a COO hat, right? And you need to understand product, prioritization within product, like life cycles there. You need to understand operations. You need to understand go to market extremely well to be able to make the decisions that you need to make in capital allocation. Going back to what we talked about is the most important thing a CFO can do for the company these years. So I really feel like that's a skill set where traditional CFOs honestly like have a hard time expanding into. But in the future, if you want to be a successful CFO, I think that's a skill set that people need to start building and understanding so you can connect the dots across all of these.
That makes sense. Well, you sort of anticipated my next question, but it's a build on a little bit. But I always like to get the perspective of high performing CFOs like yourself. What's your suggestions and advice for the next generation of CFOs? What are the things they should be thinking of, skills they should be developing, whatever it is?
First, I'll go back to what I said, curiosity, right? Curiosity and learning about not only finance, but operations, about product, something that's beyond that, and really wearing that COO, CEO hat to be able to make your decisions. That's going to be super critical. The second most important, and I said this earlier in my podcast too, you're only as good as your team. So who do you surround yourself with? Who do you hire? How do you build a organization with psychological safety? Because as a CFO, you're accountable for a lot of decision. You sign a lot of documents. You're a director at the company. And the only way you can get comfortable is when you build psychological safety and people on your team can push back and tell you the truth. So how do you build a high-performing team and drive psychological safety within that? And then the third thing is it's pretty lonely when you're a CFO and you're making decisions. How do you build a community around you? And which is where, like Jack, I think your community is highly helpful. I have a number of mentors that have gone on to become CFOs that you can call and be like, oh my God, I'm trying to make this decision. Does that make sense or not? So those are the three biggest things I would say future CFOs should think about.
I think that's great. And Rachita, I want to thank you for your time. I know you're really busy and appreciate your carving out an hour or so to join us. And I know my listeners are going to absolutely love what you have to say. And I just want to give you the final word to wrap this up.
Jack, thank you for building this community. I think the community really helps us stay up with the evolving market and the decisions that we're doing. And thank you to the listeners for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.